Convene this meeting of the City Council at 5:08. This is the public informational hearing on public questions for the March 3rd, 2020 annual meeting. And we will start with passing the agenda. Item number 1 is the agenda. Any counselor that would like to move that? Councilor Busher.
So I will move to adopt the agenda as presented.
I'm going to second that. All those in favor of the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have the agenda. Item number 2 are the public questions. So we will call up first the school budget for fiscal year 2021. So if School Board Chair Claire Wool and Director of Finance Nathan Lavery will give us a short presentation. Channel 17 is covering this, and we'll see if anyone from the public wants to say anything.
Great, thank you. Good evening. So the question on the ballot on town meeting day, and for those voting early, is to adopt the school budget. It's a $91.5 million budget. In that budget, there are increases associated with items like wages, obviously, and health insurance in particular is a major cost driver that's putting upward pressure on the budget, as well as included in that is the beginnings of repayment on debt that we expect to borrow associated with the redesign and renovation of the high school.
Nathan, could you pull the microphone a little closer just for Channel 17?
Is that better?
Yep.
Great. So the projected impact of this budget on property taxpayers is 7.36% increase. And on income payers, the income cap would increase by 3.18%. I think it's worth putting those numbers in a little bit of context. When we began the budget development process and assessed all of the cost pressures, all the things that were putting upward pressure on the budget number, we were looking at an increase that would have been over 10%. Fortunately, we were able to reduce the burden on taxpayers by nearly $1.3 million by applying some surplus funds to buy down the rate somewhat. And then the school board worked with the superintendent to go line by line through the budget to identify other reductions. And ultimately, some of the reductions included items like eliminating 2 central office positions, as well as scaling back some of the estimates related to some increased operational costs. So by and large, we achieved or identified about $1 million worth of reductions to the budget, non-instructional in nature, so not having direct services to students impacted at all. There were a few items that were added back in that were identified as priorities for the district, including additional funds for safe and inclusive schools, as well as adding a computer science teacher to the high school, for example, and adding some field trip funding for our middle school that's not located very close to downtown so that they could get down here. So the net impact of all of those, the reductions that I mentioned earlier and some of these modest reinvestments was still an additional reduction of about $750,000 from our original projections. So even with that, plus the application of the surplus to buy down the tax rate from over 10%, we still end up at about a 7.3% property tax rate increase that's projected based on the information that we know right now. So that is the budget in a nutshell. The information for folks who want it is available on the school district's website, www.bsdvt.org. There's a budget tab there that has all sorts of information from general summaries to actually line item level detail about the budget for those who are interested in it. So we'd, at that point, I think, wrap up the presentation and take any questions.
Chairwoman Wool, did you have any comments you would like to add?
No, just that having just had our February board meeting and our auditor come and give his presentation, the district remains incredibly fiscally strong. We have been on budget over the past several years, and we take that responsibility very seriously. We understand the cost implications, some that are beyond our control, like healthcare, and we appreciate the City Council's support and are hopeful that the taxpayers as well will recognize our fiscal responsibility and due diligence in making what was a difficult year, presentable in the best terms possible for this year's budget.
All right, thank you. I do not see any members of the public here to ask any questions. Any questions from a city councilor? We've, of course, heard the presentation before. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Item number 2 is the increase in the public safety tax. Chief Locke. Good afternoon, Chief Locke.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for being here.
Question number 2 is a proposal to raise the public safety tax by 3 cents or about a 3.5% increase in the municipal tax rate for the primary purposes of staffing a third ambulance for the fire department. And there are some other public safety needs that would cover. So that is the question that will be before you. So the cost of that on the median home value in Burlington is about $69 on your annual tax bill. And so if there's any other questions, I will take them.
All right, thank you, Chief Locke. Again, no members of the public are here. Any question from City Councilor on the public safety tax? Councilor Busher?
So since this is being televised, I have had a couple of questions about, I say the majority is going to staff the ambulance, but there are some other public safety needs that are addressed. Could you just remind us what those are?
Sure. So there's about of the 1.2 million that the 3 cents generates, about a little over 700,000 of that is for the staffing for the ambulance. About a couple $100,000 in pay incentives that have been put into the public safety fire department over the last year. You have CAD, computer-aided dispatch fees. There's 75,000 over 75,000 for paramedic education, which is increased training for our medical responders. I think those are the big ticket items.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. Anything else? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Chief Locke. Item number 3 is the proposed charter change regarding the Housing Trust Fund. Todd Rawlings from CEDO. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. The ballot question concerning the Housing Trust Fund is to whether or not to increase the property tax for the city's Housing Trust Fund from approximately 1/2 penny to 1 penny on every $100 of assessed value. This 1/2 penny currently generates about $200,000 a year for Housing Trust Fund activities. The Housing Trust Fund funds the production of new affordable housing in Burlington. It also provides capacity funding for organizations that provide housing services for low-income Burlingtonians. In terms of the impact for the average single-family home assessed at $230,000 in Burlington, the current impact is $12.42 goes to the Housing Trust Fund. If increased, that same household would pay $23 per year to the Housing Trust Fund.
All right. Thank you. Questions? Councilor Hanson?
Thanks. Could you just take us through the percentage of, you said it was a few $100,000 a year, kind of out of that in a typical year, maybe in the past year, how much of that goes where? And how much of it rolls over into the next year? Just a sense of the proportions of where that money's flowing.
Sure. So per City Council resolution and CDNR approval, 15% of the Housing Trust Fund goes to the administration of the Housing Trust Fund, which helps in part administer the inclusionary zoning ordinance compliance. The balance of that falls into 2 buckets. One is grants which go for the production of new affordable housing. I would say that's about typically well over 50% of the annual allocation. The balance of that goes to capacity grants for nonprofits like COTS, Cathedral Square Corporation, Champlain Housing Trust, Home Share receives a grant. The capacity grants tend to be relatively modest. And there have been cases where we have carried funds over to the following fiscal year, but typically we are oversubscribed for, in other words, requests are exceeding the available funding for the Housing Trust Fund.
That's helpful, thank you. And could you give an approximation of the breakdown between those two buckets in terms of the direct subsidy for affordable housing versus the grants that support existing organizations? Kind of how much of the money goes towards each, roughly?
Sure, yeah. This year was slightly unusual in that we had a new applicant for capacity funding, the Cathedral Square Corporation. But typically, we have about $65,000 going for capacity per year. There's a priority on capacity grants going to entities that create new affordable housing as opposed to providing services. So the balance of the funding is going to the production of new affordable housing, like the Laurentide project on North Avenue or the Juniper project, both in the Cambrian Rise project, creating a lot of new affordable housing.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Hanson. Any other questions from the council? Hearing none, thank you very much, Mr. Rawlings. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The final item on our agenda and on the ballot for March is the proposed change regarding changes to the local election dates. Amy from the City Clerk's office.
So question 4 on the ballot is a proposed charter change that would change deadlines for certain local election items. The primary goal with this charter change is to have early voting ballots available 45 days before any special election, which is the same as the deadline for us to have early ballots available for state elections. In order to meet that deadline, we also are requesting changes to deadlines for candidates filing petitions to run for office and citizens filing petitions for ballot questions that they want to see on the ballot. So this will affect special elections only, not our annual March elections. The reason we're seeking this change is to line up those deadlines. By doing so, this will allow the city clerk's office to send ballots in one mailing at the same time rather than in 2 separate mailings a couple of weeks apart. This will create a lot of administrative efficiencies as well as cost savings in postage and supplies. It will also benefit the voter by allowing them extra time to cast their ballots.
Thank you. So just to be clear, it only affects, you said, special elections?
Yes, so most of the time that would be an election in November where we have city questions in addition to our statewide general election ballot.
Okay, not the town meeting.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions from the council? Councilor Hanson?
Thanks, Amy. So I have 2 quick questions that are, I think, related, but for this election cycle, I voted by mail, and the federal ballot was in a separate envelope from the local ballot. But just to clarify, though, with this, they would be in the same envelope, the 2 ballots, or would it be separate?
They would be in the same envelope. The one exception would be in years like this where we have a presidential primary and a city election, since we are not changing the deadlines for an annual city election. But were this in November when we'd have our general election ballot and a city ballot, they would be mailed in one envelope, and the voter would put them in one envelope and send them back together.
Okay. Why don't we, in this case, why weren't they in the same envelope?
Because some presidential primary ballots went out early, It's a tracking problem. If we send some out separate and some out together, we don't know what we're getting back, and that doesn't allow our staff to accurately track who's cast what ballots.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you for that.
Sure.
And then I'm trying to think of my other question. Someone else can go. I'll come up with the other question in a second.
Counselor Jang?
Yep, I would be surprised if it will fail, but if it does, if it fails, what's the plan B?
We'll have to continue doing business the way we have been doing it. We're certainly capable of getting the election done like this, but this would certainly save us a lot of money and time and processing early ballots.
Thank you.
Counselor Hanson, did you remember your question?
I did, yeah. And it's not exactly rated on this, but it's very related, I think helpful for anyone watching. I just wanted to clarify, are you all open this Saturday for early voting?
Yes, we will be open 9 to noon on Saturday for anyone who would like to come in to register to vote or vote early.
Okay, great, thank you. And Monday is 9 to 1?
That's correct.
9 to 1 p.m.
8 to 1 p.m.
8 to 1?
Yep.
Okay, all right, great.
Voters will be able to drop off ballots until 4:30. We just won't be issuing new ballots after 1 p.m.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get that out there for folks watching.
Thank you, Counselor Hanson. Counselor Jang?
Yep, so as you probably know, in one of the ballots, there will be a write-in. Now, the results, will it de-expedite the result coming out?
So we will know quickly how many write-in votes were cast, but it will take some time throughout the evening for election workers to identify who those write-in votes were for. So the machines can read if a voter circles the bubble to write in a candidate, but it can't read the words of what name was written in. So we should have that late in the evening on election night. It just won't be as quickly as we'll have all of the other results.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Jang. Any other questions for Amy? Hearing none, thank you very much, Amy. We appreciate it. And that concludes the ballot items informational public questions session. And the motion to adjourn is in order. Moved by Counselor Busher, seconded by Counselor Jang. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. And everyone, please remember to vote on Tuesday or before Tuesday if you choose to.